Hey everyone, John here, and it's been a while since I've done an Embroidery Medic video, and this one's going to be a bit of a deep dive. I'm pretty much starting from scratch, and if I'm known for any one single tagline, it's the proof is in the stitching, and that's what this video is going to be all about. What we see on screen and what we get when it sews out on the machine are two totally different things. So I am going to do a deep dive into this one. Now, if you like these types of videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button and also hit that bell so that you're notified every time we release a new video. Now, this design was posted in one of our Facebook groups, and they posted a picture of the sewn sample, and the question was, how can I improve this design? Well, it was too many words to write on a post, and I asked if they could send me the EMB file because it was digitized in Wilcom Hatch. I asked them for the original artwork and the original photo, and when I had this design brought in and brought it up on the screen, the first thing I did was I compared the actual stitch file to the artwork, and I did right away notice some discrepancies between the two with regards to how I would probably digitize. Now, I do want to say there's really nothing really wrong with this design. It's fairly well done, but there are some foundational mistakes, and I really did notice those foundational mistakes as I looked at the file, saw things like properties, stitch directions, how it was laid out, but the proof was in the stitching, and that's where I stitched out this design, and that's where I saw the issues that on screen I knew were going to happen, but when you stitch it out, it kind of verifies things. This is something you have to remember. You get better with time when it comes to digitizing. Experience is your friend, because after seeing things repeat themselves over and over and over again, sometimes thousands or tens of thousands of times, you know how things are going to react. And if you've ever taken my education, you'll know that I always teach to digitize at set scales, because what you see on screen and then what you see sewing out on the machine will always have a direct resemblance to each other, and you take away a lot of the guessing game when it comes to digitizing and editing. So what happened was, when I saw this artwork, I noticed that there were some, differences in colors. There were some outlines that were missing. And then when I looked at the actual file, and if you look right over here, I'll bring this over so that we can see the stitch out. I stitched it out on what I would consider the worst case scenario, which would be on a very thin PK knit, for a golf shirt. And I made sure I didn't use any water soluble topping, because a lot of times people don't in that situation. I did use a no-show mesh. I did hoop it within a round hoop, so it was hooped properly. And I did make sure that when I was done, I went outside and I held this up to the sunlight. And when I held it up to the sunlight, which you can see in this picture right here, and let me just zoom in, that cross is now illuminated and we can see the sun shining through. That means that the stitch angles within this design were going one direction, which caused all of those fills to pull on each other, and instead of overlapping in areas where they should have, we have essentially cut lines right through the material. And if I were to take my finger and poke really hard on the center of this cross, it might actually poke through the fibers of the garment, because you can see that there is light shining through right there. So we're just going to take a look at this file, and I'm going to show you some of the things that I noticed that weren't quite right, and then without getting too deep into that, I'm going to show you the design that I digitized and what I changed within it, because there is a lot of stuff. I'm not going to go into a complete digitizing lesson, because we could spend hours and hours on this design with the theory, but I will show you the changes that I made. Okay, so if I dive deep into this, I'm going to turn off the true view so I just see the stitches, and I'm also going to do a quick replay of the design. Now I can see that this design only has two colors, and although that sounds like a good thing, it could actually work against you with a lot of details like this all needing to be done. Sometimes having extra color changes will aid in the registration of a design and how things line up. So even though your artwork might only be black and white, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to only have two color changes within a two-color design. You might have more if you want to make sure that things are going to register properly. Now there is also 19 trims in this design and 22 objects, so that actually sounds pretty impressive overall. And if I do look at the player here and I see it how this is actually stitched out, and I am going to go in and I'm going to speed things up just a little bit so we can see how it plays through. There is fill stitches, and they have this at a slight angle, and all of the angles are the same. It's moving from one side down to the other. They're kind of changing stitch directions within this, so they're going from the top to the bottom, and then some of these are going from the bottom to the top. I do like to keep consistency in my flow of stitches, but all of this is done now, and these are satin stitches. All of this is done in pieces, so there's only two colors. So they did the fills first, and now they're actually doing the satins, which that does kind of make sense because larger fills will pull more on material than satin stitches will. But by following the artwork like this and carving out all those holes where the black has to line up and keeping all of those stitch directions in the fills all the same direction, those could all work against you. I also notice within these satin objects that are sewing right now, there is just some zigzag stitches and there's no edge run. That's like trying to create something without having a break wall in it. I like a lot of times an edge run underlay to create a foundation for the objects that are being sewn. Now the next thing it does right away after doing those white areas is it went in and it's starting to do this black, and it's doing the black satin stitch details first. Now this almost goes in reverse to what I just said. Doing the fills first, the larger areas, and then going to the smaller satins, that kind of makes sense. But now they've kind of switched gears and they're going from the satins and doing all of these satins, and I can kind of understand why. They want to make sure those satins line up as closely as possible to the satins that were just laid down. So that's why they're done first. Then they went and they did the fill stitches. And when the fill stitches go down, it's at the exact same angle as the other fills. Now, when you have the stitches going at the exact same angles and there isn't that much overlap where those two are meeting up, they're meeting up almost dead on the same area. And those stitches are going to pull apart, and that's why we're getting a lot of this splitting. Especially in those satin stitches within the cross, we could literally see the light shining through that because all the satins pulled apart and there was no underlapping stitches to accommodate for that pulling. So all of those pieces are done, then it continues to do the fill stitches, and they're all going the same direction. And at this point, all of the fills and everything is done within the center, and then the lettering is done. And again, the lettering is a center run underlay, which even though those are fairly small letters, I think I would probably use a little bit of more of a break wall within that font so that it doesn't fall into the fill stitches underneath. And then it does at the very end this satin outline, which is outlining everything. And the satin outline again is a satin outline. It does look a little bit unclean through some of these areas. It doesn't look like the objects are nice and smooth, but there is again no edge run underlay to help build that retaining wall and to maintain that shape within the design. After it does that, then it does that bar right down the center and the design is done. And if I zoom in, I can definitely see some gapping going on right here between these stitches. So I can tell that there's going to be issues in many parts of this design because all the stitch angles are going together in the same direction. So when I re-digitized this design, I didn't really go 100% with the artwork, and that is kind of true for almost every design I've digitized for embroidery. With regards to artwork, it's never really created with embroidery in mind as its primary function or use. So I'm always going in there and I am adjusting the widths of objects and trying to make things embroidery friendly without necessarily changing the design's appearance overall. I want to make sure that I make subtle changes that will increase the quality of the design so that the person viewing it has absolutely nothing bad to say about the design other than it looks great. So these are changes that I would make without necessarily asking permission from the customer. Some of these would be the width of the stitches, how the lettering is changed a little bit, just so I get better results overall. Now the first thing I'd like to do before we take a deep dive into the stitch directions, stitch types, and properties that I used to create this design, I just wanted to do a quick comparison of the original artwork and what I actually digitized. Now, if you look at the two designs, artwork and actual design, you're going to see that things appear to be a little bit bolder with comparison to outlines. The actual satin stitch outlines are concerned. This is from the actual borders. There's two outer borders, one white and one black. And within the artwork, you can see them, but they are very, very thin in their width. They're probably, the black one looks like it might be 1 millimeter at the most. And that's really not a thick enough satin stitch border to give you, I guess, a clean outline. And it would probably disappear with a double border, because you have to remember the satin stitches are more than likely going both in the same direction. So I definitely increased both of those outer borders. I also increased the white border right here, which sort of separates the logo from the lettering portions of the design. And the lettering itself, I did modify slightly with regards to the height of the lettering, because I needed to have a little bit more space. I didn't want to alter the logo too much in reality from the original artwork, but there had to be a bit of give and take somewhere. If I wanted to keep the design proportions the same, I had to change the lettering height a little bit so that it would allow for more space of those satin stitch columns that were going around the outside, and thickening up those widths as well. Now, the other main difference that you'll notice is with the actual cross in the center, I didn't just digitize them as one object with one stitch direction. I did create these little objects that are going off of the main satin stitch as their own objects, so they will create more definition as the satin stitch turns. And you will also notice that the black and the white, the black always appears on screen to be a little thinner, and the white objects appear to be much thicker. Now, this is the golden rule of embroidery, that what you see on screen and what you get when it stitches out are two different things. Because these stitch directions are going in the same direction, and I know that the first one, which is the black, is going to stitch first, and then the white's going to go over top, I had to make sure that for the black I had enough underlapping, and with the overlapping of the white, I made sure I extended it, and I made sure that my break wall, which is my edge run underlay, stopped more towards the actual center of the design, so that when the black went down and the white came and went and sunk into the stitches going the same direction, that underlay break wall gave it a nice, strong dividing line, and stopped it dead in its path, which should be in the center of the object. And keeping all of that consistent, that really is the key, so that when it stitches out, it's going to look as perfect as possible. Now we'll focus more on the design itself. So I'm going to get rid of the artwork, and I'm going to center this more on screen just so that we can see it. And I'll do a slow redraw of this design, and we can take a look at the properties and the sequence in which the objects were digitized. So if I go to my player and I see the first color, and there is actually 4 colors in this design now. The original design had only 2 colors. I did change things in that I added 2 extra color changes to ensure that I'd get better registration within the designs. Now I also, if you notice this first one that's stitching out, and it is rather slow right now, but there is a fill or tatami underlay as well as an edge run. So that is going to give me a base for this fill stitch to lay down on, but it's also going to give me that break wall, which will help define the shape. And I did lessen the width of the spacing between the underlay stitches for the fill. I think I pretty much doubled it from what it was, because it really didn't need to have that many stitches. And I knew that by adding all the extra borders in this design, I was going to increase the stitch count. So I had to try to reduce the stitches in some other areas where I knew I could get away with it. So it's doing that first fill. Now, if you look at the direction of that fill, the direction of all the white fills are going to go the exact same direction. So I am following a fill direction that is consistent for all of these pieces, and I'm traveling from one object to the other. And then when it gets to the other object, I'm actually changing the color, and this fill has pretty much the same direction as well, which is the black, and then it will continue to do the other black pieces within the design. So it's going to do the next one, which is going to be right here, and I join closest point, and it's coming down. Now, this is where the fill directions are changing ever so slightly. If I look at the direction of this fill, and if I hit the H key, I can see that it's 37 degrees. And if I find the direction of this fill right here, and let's turn off the true view so that I can select these, that was 37 degrees. This one is actually going to be 15 degrees. So all of the black areas are 15 degrees and all of the white areas are 37. And this black area right here is going to be more than likely, if I can find out where it is, there we go, it is actually going to be 22 degrees. So I've actually changed the stitch directions of pretty much all of the fills. All the whites are 37 within the shield, all of the blacks are 15, and then I changed the stitch direction of the top piece to, I think it was 22 degrees. And I would have done that kind of randomly. Now the main reason why I changed that top fill and I don't just have it going horizontally is because with the lettering the way it's designed usually has majority of the stitches either running horizontally or vertically. And if you have a horizontal stitch direction for lettering, which is a satin stitch going on a horizontal fill, they will have a tendency to sink into each other, and the V and the bottom bar of the T and the I might appear a little thinner than the other letters that are opposing the stitch direction. So when I digitize a design, especially a design like this, which is for left chest, I know it's going on a golf shirt, I actually have a reason pretty much for everything as to why I'm using stitch directions, fills, underlay. All of that does come into play as I'm creating a design. So let's go back to the viewer and let's bring this up full screen, and I'm going to turn back on my true view so you can see it being generated. And there we're right about here where we're at this color. All of these fills are being done. And if you will notice one thing when I get right to here, and I'm just going to pause this for 1 second. So I'm going to pause right here and I'm going to zoom in. You will notice that I really made sure that I do not have a lot of density right in the center of this design. I have made sure that I have left less stitches right in the center point, because as we go through this design, you're going to see that it could be potentially a very hard area for embroidery, because all of the satin stitches within that cross, they all collide into that one focal point, and that will cause some problems potentially later on. So I did make sure that I lessened the amount of buildup of stitches in there. Now for the outside of this black, which the black is going down first, so I have the outer border going down first. This black area, you'll notice that the underlay that I'm actually using is a zigzag, because it's a larger satin stitch. I want to make sure there's a foundation, but then I do an edge run. And I even choose the sequence of my underlays for a reason. One is for stability, the other one is for clarity, and I don't mix those two up. I don't reverse them. I don't do clarity and then stability, because then the stability will offset my clarity. I want my stability first and then my clarity. And when we continue to go through this, you'll see that I have my edge run, then it does the satin stitch around the outside, and it will continue to do that path. I'm making sure there's a proper foundation for every element of my design. Then I change colors. I do that first border that's intersecting around there, and both of these do have an edge run. I really don't need to have a zigzag and an edge run in these, because it is being laid on stitches, on fill stitches and on a satin stitch. The stability is already there, so I don't need to ensure there's more stability, but I do need to make sure that I have an edge run so that I increase the clarity of the stitches so that they look nice and crisp and clean when they're done. There is my border, and then I will go in and do the lettering right away, making sure that I all join closest point. If I were to come in at a 6:1 scale, this is the scale that I digitize. If you've ever taken our education, if you've done our Digitizer's Dream course, you know right from the very beginning, right at lesson 1, within level 1, I teach the stitching or digitizing at a 6:1 scale. It is always consistent, and that's so I know how much I need to cut back my open ends to adjust for the push and the pull compensation that's happening in a design. You don't get that dancing baseline of letters because we have accommodated for it right at the exact size that the design was being digitized for. And when you're doing, I guess custom designs, because this is a custom digitized design, it's for a certain size, certain purpose, and you are going to probably only ever run this design for this application. And again, custom designs need to be as perfect or as close to the logo as possible. I make sure that everything is done specifically for that size, including the lettering. When you're dealing with stock designs, it's a little bit different because there you have some play and you aren't necessarily looking at perfection. Now, when you look at these being created, again, I have my edge runs and I am allowing for this overlap. If you look at that right there, there is a consistent amount of overlap right in this area. I'm not going right on the line. If I turn that off, you can see that there is all of this space from here to here that is being underlapped, allowing for the overlap. And there is my edge run, my break wall that's going to give that white stitching the definition that I'm looking for. As I turn back on the true view, you're going to see that it's going to give me a nice clean edge, even though that white stitching does look a lot thicker than the black. And also this area right in the center here where I was worried about those stitches all coming in and, coming into one intersection, you'll still notice that even there, as I built up all of these areas on top of each other, I did make sure that I tried to reduce the amount of stitches that were all coming in and intersecting into that one center point. I don't want this design, when it's finished, to have so many stitches coming into that one point that it actually will cause the logo on the garment to almost have a little dip or could push out. And you want to make sure it's nice and flat all the way around. Well, that's a pretty deep dive into this design, and we didn't actually digitize it with you, but I went into all the properties and settings and I gave you the theory behind the design. And remember, the most important thing is the proof is in the stitching. This design actually sewed out beautifully when it was done. Keeping in mind, if I were to assess the two, my stitch count was higher by about 1,500 stitches or so. The original stitch count was 10,819. Mine was 13,317. I did have 2 extra color changes within my design, but the big difference is they had 19 trims and I had 11 trims. So I kind of counteracted some of that runtime with reducing the amount of trims on the design. But for the extra borders and clarity of the design and detail that we're getting, I think it was well worth re-digitizing and adding those extra objects to increase the quality. Hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you next time.